Week 16 is here. We have reached, Ed, our NFL Fantasy Football Playoff semi-final week. So now more than ever, especially with some tough matchups and some injuries to add into the mix, our starts and sits become ever more crucial if we are to avoid the toilet bowl final or progress to championship glory. So my starts of the week, some of these feel like the hits from throughout the season so far because some of the players we've spoken about have got some really, really nice matchups this week. We said Darren Waller last week. He was your waiver wire pickup of the week. He was a start of the week option. He was streaming tight end of the week option. And understandably, there was a little bit of caution because although the matchup was favourable, the game script was favourable, we'd not seen him do it. But it was better than expected. And even though the match indicated routes say it wasn't a guarantee, but last week, the match script indicated a guaranteed route success for Andrews and Likely. That Bengals defense is who Waller faces this week. I just don't see a way that Miami only passed the ball for 8 completions as Lamar did last week. And that was clearly what impacted Andrews and Likely. So I suppose the question for you, Ed, are you feeling not very confident about the Bengals defense this week in the same way that we're feeling maybe quite confident about Waller?
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals defense haven't been terrible the last few weeks. That's the best compliment you can give them, I suppose. I suppose the thing with Miami is it's been confirmed that Quinn Ewers is going to start. So I don't know where Tua's been benched. So I don't know, is that a good or a bad thing for Tua? I suppose it remains for Darren Waller. It remains to be seen, really.
I suppose we say quite a lot, don't we, that a rookie QB's best friend is his tight end. Also, a not very good QB's best friend is his tight end. So, I don't know, is Tua any different to you as for Waller at this point? We shall see. Next up, Dallas Goedert, a player we've mentioned quite a few times over the course of the season as well. Tight end 4 last week with 6 receptions, 2 touchdowns, and that's followed up a game against the Commanders defense. We're given the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Justin Herbert. We always check who the Cowboys have, and this week it's Herbert's turn to have a good week at QB. He's had 5 consecutive weeks outside of the top 12. I think that's why he's low starting percentage currently. That's understandable. But I feel relatively confident he'll turn that around this week. Whether we'll have a good week for our Chargers wide receivers remains to be seen. Next up, JJ McCarthy. I think I mentioned him every single show at this point. We told you this was coming, and he was QB 10, QB 7, and I reckon this is his routes to a top 6 week. Can you explain, Ed, why is he only 25% rostered when we've got such favourable matchups? He's done it 2 games in a row, and we said to pick him up. Why is he only 25% rostered?
I'm going to give you the credit here. I think it was you that said to pick him up. I was a bit more sceptical, and I think it was the reason might explain why he's still so lowly rostered was just because he'd shown no signs of this at all. And I suppose, despite the matchup, people were nervous about starting him, but he's proved that he's got the quality, and you've got to expect him to do it again against a poor Giants defense.
Yeah, they're going at the 2nd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. If you had Mahomes, go and try to get McCarthy. If you worried about Joe Burrow's current trough that he's found himself in, go and get yourself JJ McCarthy. If your QB isn't projected to be a top 8 QB this week, I would shoot for the stars with JJ McCarthy's potential ceiling in this game. So that's where I'm at. And we're going to mention him in a moment in an either or situation when we get to sits as well. Next up, I'm going to stick with the Vikings and I'm going to stick with that poor Giants defense. And I'm going to go for Aaron Jones. Now, this is a solid flex play projection for me, not a top 12, a vision for his current. Jones just isn't that RB anymore, I don't think. And Mason is obviously getting work as well. He'll get the work against the Giants. We're given it the 2nd most fantasy points per game, the 2nd most rushing yards, and the 6th most rushing touchdowns so far this season. So I think Jones is a solid flex option for you this week. And then finally, Michael Wilson. So the Falcons defense have been given up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. And even in a tough matchup last week, Wilson produced to the tune of wide receiver 17. Considering he was picked up most leagues on waves around week 11, as an absolute minimum, he is a locked in, solid flex play this week. Even if you have got other decent wide receiver options, this is the sort of pickup earlier in the season, for me, could prove to be a championship winner.
Yeah, it's fascinating what's happening in Arizona. Obviously, with Jacoby Brissett deputising brilliantly for Kyler Murray, what's going to happen with Kyler? I mean, you assume he'll come back next year. And then Michael Wilson versus Marvin Harrison Jr. You know, Marvin Harrison Jr., the superstar wide receiver, I suppose, who's never quite hit his straps. It'll be interesting to see that battle between Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. next year, because Wilson certainly put in a really good shift over the last few weeks.
There's got to be consideration out there as putting in a genuine, proven downfield passer quarterback, and could he turn these into quite a dangerous duo and give us two fancy options? That's going to be one of those narratives. I say I'm going to start off saying we find interesting. I imagine I'll be bored to death of by about April, but we shall see. If you have not yet, though, please do give us a subscribe, a like, and a share. So we're approaching the end of the season, but we have plenty to bring you through the off season as well. For the next couple of weeks, though, as well as our starts, we have our sits and our options. I'm starting off in the game. I've given you two starts in the Vikings-Giants game. I'm going to give you two sits as well. Because, Ed, when it comes to quarterbacks playing the Vikings, we don't start them. Simple. They've only given up 5.84 fancy points per game over the last 4 weeks. So I'm going to copy and paste. Wan'Dale Robinson against the Vikings is also a sit, because we don't start wide receivers against the Vikings defense. Simple yet again. Fewest fancy points per game to wide receivers this season. Once again, players that we spoke highly of and players that maybe next week I'll be saying the exact opposite for, but don't get complacent, play the matchups, and this is one where I would be doing that. Now, this is a little bit off-brand for us, Ed, over the last few weeks, but I would be sitting Matt Stafford this week. Reason being, he's got the Seahawks defense. They've been given up the second fewest fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. We follow the data. It's what we always do with our starts and sits, and that would indicate this. So the sits given the fifth fewest fantasy game over the whole season. So they've been consistent. It's not just the last 4 weeks they've been doing that. And that is 7.42 over those last 4 weeks. He's had his down games, and looking at when those down games have come, they have come against stronger defenses in projected matchups that will be difficult for a quarterback. I have a question for you, Ed. My answer is absolutely locked in. I think I know what the right answer is for everyone, but I don't think it's an easy one to give because it just doesn't sound right based on the names. Would you want to start this week Matt Stafford or JJ McCarthy?
Well, I know your answer is JJ McCarthy, and I know that's where the stats point. But I think Matt Stafford, I've got him in a few leagues. He's been very good to me over the last few weeks. And someone in such red-hot form, I find it incredibly difficult to bench. But you were right about Mahomes. So I suppose I'd have to trust in you. But when it actually came to pulling the trigger on benching Matt Stafford, I would find it very hard this season.
And I've absolutely had misses when it's come to our starts and sits as well. But we've had a good record this season when it's come to the big sits in the big spots. And I just feel this is going to keep my run going. 100%. I'll be starting McCarthy this week. But we shall see if it doesn't work out. I just won't mention it on our Monday show. Harold Fanning against the Bills. So he's been a regular start for us, and the Bills, when we look at tight ends, have always been a regular team we will sit them against. We were a little bit cautious last week after the Gesicki masterclass against them at tight end previously. Turns out that was an outlier because they then went on to keep Hunter Henry quiet last week. So I think they'll do the same again with Fanning. And I just think Sanders is going to struggle in this game as well. We started to see those struggles really coming through last week. I've grown a bit tired of the just weighing in on Shadur Sanders. I think next week will be the true indicator of him. Next year, not next week. So that he'll be definitely one that will be interested to continue watching. Travis Etienne versus the Broncos. He's had 11 top 24 games this season, and that does seem to have kind of just steadily snuck up on us. I don't know. Has that been on your radar? It's something this feels like it's passed me by because I've just not got him anywhere. I've not really concentrated on him.
Well, no, I think when I was doing Heroes this week and he was a hero, and I was surprised to see him. I think he was RB10, and that's why I think we said in Heroes he's kind of sneakily been fairly consistent. So yeah, I think it has crept up on everyone a little bit.
He has had 3 games of fewer than 10 points this season as well, though. And last week was actually quite a poor rushing game. 12 attempts for 32 yards, and his 3 receptions for 73 yards is a huge outlier when we look at everything Travis Etienne has ever done before that game. I just think when we look similar to Stafford, when you've looked at the games where Stafford's been quiet, they've been in the obvious ones. When you look at the games where Etienne has scored fewer than 10 points, they've been ones where we could have predicted it. So I just think the Broncos are going to keep him pinned at the line of scrimmage on quite a few attempts this week. So I can see a case absolutely for starting Etienne regardless. But for me, he'd be a player I'd be looking elsewhere. Am I being a little bit stingy on him because of him letting me down in seasons gone by?
Well, I'm going slightly against you here because Broncos Jags is my game of the week, and I've got Travis Etienne locked in, but I'll talk more about that shortly.
I like it when we disagree. We don't disagree very often. It's quite nice when we do. Jaylen Warren versus the Lions. He did get over being poorly sick. Did he get you enough points?
No, he probably didn't get me enough. No, it wasn't his fault. I don't blame him because at least he did play. I blame DJ Moore. I hate DJ Moore. I hate him. I'm really annoyed that I didn't get through in that, but sorry, I'm over it now.
It sounds it. He's a player that is definitely not reliable or matchup proof. Without hesitation, I'm sitting him this week. I'd maybe be thinking about starting Kenneth Gainwell regardless because he just feels like he's got a couple of big plays in him. The reason is the Lions given it the second fewest fantasy points per game over the course of this season. So Jaylen Warren will be on my bench. I'd maybe go further than that because he's got Cleveland next week as well. So I think actually given some potential other options that you could pick up or plug in, if you need to get someone or you're thinking ahead to next week in trying to get someone plugged in, I think Jaylen Warren is actually in redraft droppable for me at this point. And in redraft, you can make those decisions this week. If you know you're not going to be plugging a player in next week, bin them off and put someone else on your bench that you might play next week, or just obstructs your opponent potentially to your route to the championship. You already mentioned it. Your game of the week this week, Ed, is one that if we'd said was going to be a game of the week at the business end of the season before the season commenced, we'd know that these teams had fortunes we weren't expecting this season. That's exactly where we're at.
Indeed, yeah, Jags v Broncos. It's a massive match. The picture there's an interesting one. I think it shows we need to remember the Jags are a relatively new franchise, aren't they? So they haven't played the Broncos very often. That picture's running back Natrone Means diving forward for additional yards during the Jags' 30-27 victory over the Broncos in the 1996 AFC divisional playoff game at Mile High. So a bit of a retro picture there. It's another great week of fixtures. You've got Bucks, Panthers, Steelers, Lions, Patriots, Ravens, 49ers, Colts, all massive matchups. But I just think you can't look past this matchup between the current number 1 seeds in the AFC, the Broncos, and the current number 3 seeds, the Jags. The Jags won 5 in a row, and the Broncos are on an incredible run of 11 straight wins. It's a hugely exciting matchup, and something's going to have to give in the Mile High City. Right, locked in. Now, these teams are both interesting from a fantasy perspective, and you don't look at either team, and they haven't got any absolutely locked-in beasts. You know what I mean? There's no kind of like matchup-proof players. And when it comes to the Jags, there aren't normally anyone who is locked in from week to week. There are a couple of players, though, I would be starting this week after they both finished number 1 in their position last week. We mentioned him earlier, Travis Etienne. Since the bye, he's been in a really rich vein of form. 6 RB1 weeks out of 7. He's getting a lot of carries. I admit, fewer last week. He's getting touchdowns. He is involved in the receiving game, although not to the extent like he was last week. As you say, there's a big note of caution, and it is quite a big one that the Broncos are conceding the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. But I just think confidence, form have to be taken into account as well. So I'd find it difficult not to start him this week. I'd also be starting T-Law. He was QB1 last week with his biggest ever fantasy score. He's QB7 on the season, brimming with confidence. He's had 9 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions across his last 3 games. Again, this is an elite defense that they're up against, and the Broncos are giving up the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So I don't think we've got another 5 touchdown week for him incoming, but I expect him to have a solid week. What are your feelings on T-Law? Have you got him anywhere?
Yes, in a couple of dynasty. I've not got him anywhere in redraft. I've got him in a couple of dynasty, and I think super flex. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I can be confident in any situation because T-Law is a player that whatever I say is going to do, he does the exact opposite. It feels all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say he's going to be absolutely rubbish this week, knowing that I've got to play him in a couple of games.
Fair enough. The Broncos, again, they're fascinating from a fantasy perspective because despite this incredible run of form, there's not really anyone who you're locking in with complete confidence. Having said that, I think I'd be confident in starting Bo Nix. He's just behind T-Law, QB8 overall. He comes off the back of that stunning performance against Green Bay last week. Plus, the Jags are giving up the 13th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So not exactly a defense to fear. So I think Bo Nix, you probably have to lock in. Moving on to players that you should start. It's difficult to rely on Jags receivers this year. Obviously, it's been a hugely disappointing sophomore season for BTJ, but he's had a solid couple of weeks. He got only his 2nd touchdown of the season last week against the Jets. I'd just be cautious, though. He's not been T-Law's top target, and he just could let you down. I'd probably be choosing Jacoby Myers over BTJ, as he's been much more consistent over the last 5 weeks. He's averaged close to 15 fantasy points per game, and I think he's probably earned a flex spot in your starting lineup and should get to the targets you need. Who are you starting out of those two? At the start of the season, it would have been a no-brainer, but I think Jacoby Myers is inched ahead of Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, if I had to choose between both of them, I'm going for Myers, absolutely. But I do have to play Brian Thomas in a couple of places, and it worries me. I'm not starting him in with confidence anywhere, and say he's done enough to get me through. Last week was good, to be fair, considering he's kind of in a wide receiver 2 flex spot for me. Week before was all right, but yeah, he's been so dreadful the last 2 weeks. I feel he owes me personally for persevering through the bad games.
Well, I'm sure he will take that into account.
I think it's Myers' targets as well. Myers is getting more
is.
meaningful targets for fantasy and just more of them as well. So yeah, Myers is where my confidence would be.
And tight end for the Jags, Brenton Strange. He's just someone I'm a bit undecided about after a couple of quieter weeks. He only had 1 reception last week against the Jets, but he has been targeted 18 times across the last 4 weeks. He'll continue to be an important part of the offense. The Broncos, maybe a chink in their defensive armor. They're giving up the 12th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. So possibly you can start Strange with a little bit of confidence. With the Broncos, there are just a lot of maybes. RJ Harvey, their RB1, is frustratingly inconsistent. He's RB21, and he has had 5 RB1 weeks this season. But in the other 9 weeks, he hasn't broken 10 points. So it's feast or famine. Can you risk him in a big fantasy playoff match? I don't know if you can. I'd be very nervous, especially as the Jags are also strong against the run. They're conceding the 4th fewest points per game to running backs. Cortland Sutton, he's another one who's had a quietly solid season. Wide receiver 11 overall. He's Bo Nix's top target. He's been targeted 10 times in both of the last 2 games. Seems to have a fairly solid floor. Just don't expect fireworks from Sutton. He's only broke 20 points twice, one of which was admittedly last time out against Green Bay. So I'd probably be leaning towards starting him. Troy Franklin, slightly riskier, who could pay off. Obviously, he was great last time out. With his 3rd wide receiver 1 performance of the season, but he preceded that with 2 scores of just over 4 fantasy points. The Jags are middle of the pack against receivers, so there could be scope for a couple of receivers to flourish. And best of luck for the Jags, anyone else really. The other wide receivers, Parker Washington and Tim Patrick, just aren't guaranteed targets, and there's no one else in fancy consideration at tight end or running back. And for the Broncos, their RB2, Jaleel McLaughlin, unlikely to get much joy with the strength of the Jags' rush defense. I'm not sure if I'd willing to risk the other receivers in my lineup. Pat Bryant, Marvin Mims, they've been fancy relevant at times, but not often enough. I'd also find it very difficult to start Evan Engram. He's tight end 30 in what has been a desperately disappointing season. One touchdown, one tight end 1 week, and just 2 scores over 10 points all season. You've surely got better options at tight end than risking Evan Engram.
It feels like quite a long time ago when we were talking about Evan Engram looking like a really good fancy value player this year and going, maybe next week, maybe next week, maybe next week. He's still been starting in 50. I'm just going out. It's currently in start times of 15% of redraft leagues on Sleeper. That is 15% of people that must have quite deep benches and can't get anybody else to try to plug in.
There are much better options out there. So
yeah, absolutely. Right. Speaking of our competitiveness in the NFL translating to our fantasy options this weekend, I think it's time we had a little look at this week's fancy props.
Fantasy props. Heston versus Ed.
I'm sure I was, what was I, 7-1? This is some comeback, this is.
I think it was, I was 6-1 ahead, I think, at one point. Wow. And I'd like to say we've done it deliberately to try to create some jeopardy in the show, but we've not. I've just not been very well. Tom helped. Tom got you two.
Tom helped me.
Yeah. It's all Tom's fault that I'm not doing very well. Last week, then, we were looking at some start sits highlights. So players that were in contention for our starts and sits last week.
DJ Moore, I told you. Whatever I said, you did the opposite, idiots.
And basically, could those players in start sits, would they be higher or lower than their average fantasy score? So you went higher for Matt Stafford, and he got you there by 0.7.
That was the difference.
DJ Moore, he was averaging 9.4, and you said lower. I think you were a little bit torn. I don't think at any point you thought he was going to get 22.9 points and blow it out of the park. Hunter Henry, you went higher. So I think it was probably a little bit of that caution around what Gesicki had just done against the Bills, wasn't it? He came out lower, 2.8. Flowers versus the Bengals, averaging 12.5, and he ended up with 15.8, so he got you just over there as well. And then finally, Dak Prescott versus the Vikings. He'd been averaging 20.1. That Vikings defense did the job yet again and held him to 11.96. You got 3 out of 5 right. You took the point. We have tied it to 7-all. So what could now begin to be a crucial week-by-week situation, Ed? What is your fantasy prop for week 16?
I suppose it's a similar one in that you're going higher or lower, but we've gone with the fancy bear moths. I've decided to roll out the big guns, and we're going for the current top 5 overall fantasy scorers. Regardless of position, we've just gone from 1st to 5th overall, and basically, will they beat their average score across the season? So starting off, number 1 at the moment is CMC. He has the Colts this week, and his fantasy average so far is 24.4 points per game. Just a bit of extra information. He has beaten that average on 6 times this year. So does he beat, is it higher or lower than 24.4?
I'm waiting for a monster CMC week. I've been putting together a video ready for the end of the season, looking at the top fantasy scores over the year, and I've not got a CMC one in there. So I'm going to try to speak it into existence. I'm hoping this will be the CMC monster week. I've not even looked at what the Colts are giving up to running backs. I'm going purely off, as Mr. Azoen would say, vibes.
Very, very as-esque. Okay. Current number 2 fantasy player is Josh Allen. He has the Browns this week, so a decent defense. He's averaging just a touch under CMC at 24.3 fantasy points. And a bit like CMC, he has beaten that score on 6 occasions this year. Does he beat it against the Browns?
The Browns have been, they've not been bad, have they, on defense? It's the one thing where the Browns have given up points has been in the rushing game. So that is potentially where I think Josh Allen gets over that line. So I'm going to go over again.
Oh, okay. So we've got 2 highs, 2 overs. Right, the next one, JT, is an interesting one. He's currently obviously 3rd overall. He has the 49ers this week. His average is 22.9 fantasy points per game. He has beaten that score on 7 times this year, but not since week 10. He has tailed off the last few weeks. I don't know if that affects your thinking.
No, I think I fancy. I think I'm just keep going higher at this rate. No, I see him getting the work done there as well. So I'm going to go higher once again for JT. He's being relied upon a lot, isn't he? I don't know. I'm just trying to think. Actually, Rivers factor. That's going to be horrible, isn't it? No, I want to go lower. I've just remembered how awful Philip Rivers looked, and I think that's going to quite hinder the passing of the ball. A little sidebar at this point. I was driving home today, and I heard on I'm going to shamelessly take the gag from another show, another podcast. So from the Fantasy Footballers, they did a great bit where they said that the intro video should currently be, "Hi, I'm 44-year-old Phil Rivers, and I'm going to play quarterback for the Colts. Welcome to Jackass."
Very good, yeah. I read something about it being to do with his medical insurance or something like that. Anyway, yeah. We digress, Mark. We digress.
Yeah, we do.
So you're going lower anyway.
Yes, yeah.
Jahmyr Gibbs is an interesting one. He's 4th overall. He has the Steelers this week. He's averaging 22.7. And I think the thing with Gibbs is he's had a couple of monster scores that has boosted that average. He's only beaten that average on 5 occasions this year because he has had a few quieter weeks. But does he get the job done against the Steelers and beat that 22.7 average?
So we said a few weeks ago after one of those monster weeks that looking at the run, we've probably seen the end of those Jahmyr Gibbs monster weeks. But the Steelers actually, so I'm just having a quick look at a tweet. Ethan Craig at FF on X. I put a tweet out earlier that caught my eye. So Pittsburgh has been the NFL's top run funnel since week 12. They've allowed 200 plus rushing yards in 2 of their last 3. So although when you look at this is why I often have a look at the scores over the last 4 weeks as well as the season wide picture. So if anyone's going to really take advantage of that, I think it is going to be Gibbs. So I'm going to go. I don't think we're going to monster months, but I could see a 30+ week here again. So I'm going to go higher for Gibbs.
Excellent. And then 5th, our top wide receiver, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Got the Rams this week, a strong defense. He's averaging 21.6 points per game, and he's beaten that score on 6 occasions this year. So does JSN beat his average?
No, I'm going to go lower here. I think I trust that the Rams defense to do a decent number, I think, on the Seahawks this week.
Brilliant. So we've got CMC higher, Josh Allen higher, JT lower, Jahmyr Gibbs higher, and JSN lower.
Fantastic. So we shall come out next week and see if you end up taking the lead for the first time this season. That is it then. That is all of our comments for week 16 in our 30-minute whistle-stop tour through the NFL. Are you in many semi-finals, Ed, this week?
I'm in a few, as I've mentioned. There's one that I'm not in that I'm very upset about, but yeah, I'm in a few and knocking about a few toilet bowls as well. There's a decent spread, Mark. What about you?
Well, I think we both do so many leagues. We absolutely should be in at least some semi-finals each, and by the end of the year. So yeah, I've got a couple of my dynasty leagues that are ones that I've won previously. So I'd love to be
back to back.
Go for a second. Yeah, I'd love to go for a second win in those. So yeah, not done so well in redraft this year. Best ball, I've had a great best ball year, but this week I bowed out of the JTT and the Battle of the Sexes and the Rainbow. So 3 that I'd been done really well in over the course of the year, and I just dropped out a couple of those where my tight ends options due to injury were only Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely this week.
No.
So That is even more annoying because I should have progressed. Anyway, I could grumble about poor choices for another half hour more, I am certain. Anything you've got to add to week 16 before we depart, Ed?
No, I'm looking forward to another great week of NFL action.
So we will see you in a couple of days for our streaming options, and we've got a couple of shorts on the way for you on YouTube and TikTok too. But that is us for now. So we should say bada bing, bada bye. And Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.